What is going on, everybody? Good evening. This is episode 4 of Beyond the Weight Room podcast. Today, what we were going to talk about is our previous entry into the field and kind of how we got to where we are now. Brett and I worked together for 2.5, 3 years, if not more than that, in St. Louis at Mercy Sports Medicine, partnered with Exos. So kind of wanted to kick it to him, and he can start with where he began this journey.
Yeah, I know I was mentioning to you earlier about, I think if you look back when I was younger, probably would have never thought that I would grow up to be a coach at all. I was pretty quiet when it came to youth and high school sports and stuff, so this was kind of a big leap for me overall. And I think it just came from a passion of sports and a young passion of lifting weights, and how that kind of, tied into everything else growing up through college and just finding the right experiences. And I think overall, and actually I had made a post about this a few weeks ago, overall, I would say the number one thing that's helped me get to where I am is just, going and doing experiences that I might not do normally because I'm nervous about doing something, right? So the best example when I was a young coach was I finished my master's. I was working in cardiac rehab, not at all what I wanted to do. It's just a job. Got offered a full-time job after grad school. And I was starting to look for other jobs. And then I got offered a unpaid internship with the U.S. ski team. At that point, I didn't really want an unpaid internship. I was looking for a job. But it was with a industry that I really wanted to work in with as far as skiing and snowboarding. I'd always talked about moving out into the mountains, so it made sense. So I quit my job. I left my girlfriend at the time, left all my friends, moved across the country where I knew nobody, didn't really know exactly what the internship was going to entail. But for me, it just made sense to kind of make that leap. And I think probably that's been the number one thing in my career that's helped me, is just taking those leaps sometimes where you don't have all that information right away. And then just putting yourself in those situations that are uncomfortable. Those are going to help you learn. Sometimes you fail. I mean, generally you'll fail at some point. If you haven't significantly failed at some point in your life yet, you will be. So get ready for that. But, coming out of that with the knowledge of, what you learn from that failure, but also I think the knowledge that you're going to be okay if you do fail. And you putting yourself in those situations is huge. So, that's kind of what I want to first start talking about with young coaches. That's what I tell a lot of young coaches is like, put yourself in those positions that suck for you. I hated talking to people. I hated talking in front of groups of people. And that was something specifically with that internship that I was like forced to do, not only from the internship, but for myself too. It's like, if you need to get better at this, you have to just go do it.
Well, I think that leads to an interesting point too, and we can always revisit kind of my career, but something that you said that sounded very familiar to my story too is taking that leap and not really knowing what to expect once you take that leap. You left home. I left home very quickly. I'm sure yours was a very quick flight out to wherever you needed to be. Like, how did that go for you?
Why is the strength conditioning industry always like that? And like, you were the same way, because I was there when you left. And it's like, you call me, you're like, hey, I'm leaving. You're like, I'm leaving in 5 days. And I was like, yeah, you know, you got a job. And I was your boss. So that was great. Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
No, it was the same thing with the ski team. I think I got offered a position. I remember driving home. I lived down in the city at the time in St. Louis. And I was driving home, got offered the position. I don't think my roommates or my parents even knew I applied for the position at that point, or that I was even interviewing, because it was so quick. It was like I had an interview. I got offered a position like a day later. And I had to be out there in like 2 weeks in Utah.
Did that matter to you at the time? Like, were you nervous about it? Like, rethinking about it, like what was going on in your head?
At the beginning, I don't think I was nervous. I think it was excitement. And I mean, I was also young, right? I didn't have the family. Like right now, it'd be extremely hard. I have a kid. Mm-hmm. But at the time I was young, I had a girlfriend, just graduated with my master's. I was like, all right, if I'm going to do it, let's go do it now. So I moved out there. And I think it was like, as I was driving out there is when I started getting nervous. Cause I remember, I think I was like outside of Cheyenne, and I just like was like at a freaking like motel somewhere with nobody.
Yeah.
What the hell?
You just had like, oh shit, what did I get myself?
I think I had a bag of clothes in my car and like 2 snowboards and like a guitar. And that's like what was in my car for the next really probably the next like 10 years of my life, because I was a strength coach bouncing around. But I mean, that's basically all it was. And I moved out there, and I mean, everything from finding some personal training stuff on the side to find some money, making friends with a lot of the locals where you can get into restaurants and bars for free, or potentially on the mountain for free. Making friends with a lot of the other interns and coaches that were with us to help build those connections, build that networking, which is the other piece I was going to talk about. And then even one of our interns figured out that we could get food stamps technically in the state of Utah. So pretty quickly, the entire U.S. ski team's internship class was on food stamps, thanks to Utah's government. And then because of us, the next year, all the interns got paid, because that might have been a little embarrassing for the U.S. team.
Yeah, that's a savvy move, but obviously has some repercussions with the next wave.
Hey, though,
the money.
Yeah, and you say it's a savvy move. It's funny because the guy that did it, Alex Blunt, he's unbelievable strength coach. He went from our class to working at Red Bull to being Lindsey Vaughn's personal trainer. So he literally worked at Red Bull for a long time, became her trainer there, and then he left there. When she retired, he became her personal trainer. And then now he runs a facility partnering up with Mount Sinai in New York City. And he works with like PK Subban, a lot of the NHL guys up there. So he's an incredibly smart guy and like just savvy guy. But like when you first would meet us, that's probably not what you'd get right away, because we're young strength coaches. Probably idiots. We have the base knowledge you need, but we didn't know how to coach yet. We didn't know how to do a lot of stuff, but we had the will to just go out, figure it out, go out, ask the questions, put ourselves in the shitty situations. Maybe not shitty, but like hard situations. And a lot of the coaches I know, or really any profession that I know, that put themselves in those positions more often than not will find success somewhere along the way. And a lot of even the smartest people I know that are scared to take some of those risks get stuck in that one spot, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's definitely people that are more willing to take some risk that eventually have success in this field, because in order to get to some of these places, like, you do have to just change your life very, very quickly when the opportunity comes. I think if you ask most strength coaches that have had success, whether it be in pro sports or they're at a management level, like at some point in their life, they probably just had to drop whatever they were doing and shift. And I think that's a very important step that young coaches have to realize may be coming up for them. I mean, going back to when I eventually took my position with the Rockies, like, I think I was hired in late February, and I started March 5th. So I had to get out of St. Louis to Phoenix.
Sell your house.
Sold my house, and Megan really helps me with that, and my family helps tremendously with doing that. I lived in a hotel for the first month, and I still didn't know where I was going. Like, I had no idea what affiliate I was going to until maybe I would say 14 to 10 days before the season started. And then that's an entire other move. So you have to look at housing options, and you have to look for all this stuff. And thankfully, at the point I entered, baseball has just been getting progressively better and better and better with helping out their employees. But yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot of unknown when you get into this field. And if this is the direction you want to go with sports, like, you're not always going to know where you're going to be until a week before, if not days.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's some people that obviously aren't going to want to do that, and that's totally fine as well. But I think just having that expectation, right? Like, if you, especially in our field, and it can be, you can say it's not fair, whatever, just it is what it is at this point. If you want to succeed in our industry specifically, like working at high level sports, especially with teams, like, you're going to have to travel around. You're probably going to bounce around as a young strength coach. You're probably not going to get paid a lot. You're probably going to work shitty hours. But a lot of the coaches I know that succeed, or like I said, are willing to take the risks and just love what they're doing. Like, I know how it is in baseball. You have sometimes 25 days on and then half a day off, and it's because you're on a bus. Like, you're pretty much going nonstop, and you're there for 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, it's a 6 month grind. Like, there's no doubt about it. It's full 6 months. And then on top of that, like, and I think it should be this way. Like, the strength staff should be wherever the spring training facility is at, so people in the off season can train there. So it slows down, but it really never stops with your interaction with the athletes. But yeah, that 6 months, like, man, it can be long at certain points. But like, if that's what you want to do, I feel like you have to try it to know, right? Like, you're not going to know if you actually want to do it until you go through a season, 2 seasons, if not multiple seasons after that. But even within that, like, you can move. Like, I found out I was going to Hartford late last year too. Like, it's just the way it works, and you figure out your plan and you make it work.
Yeah, I was told, I might have told you this too when you got the job, or like young coaches and stuff that were in baseball, or it's like during the season, there's some point where you're going to hate everybody. You're going to have 1 or 2 days during the season where you're like, nope, this is not the day. I hate everybody. And I feel like everybody during the season has that one day because you're around the same people all the time, all day. You do the same thing for 6 months, 7
Yeah,
months.
I mean, you might live with some of the other coaches or staff, and then you're with the players 14 to 15 hours a day. Like, any group of people that's around each other that much with limited space, whether it be clubhouse, field, like, you're just always in the same area. Like, tensions are gonna run high at some point. But
like
it's funny how we are less risk adverse to take the position, but you couple that with young coaches, and I know I had particularly like this scenario of trying to be perfect with everything you do. So on one side, you have like this ultimate perfectionism, and then on the other hand, you have to take these leaps that you don't know, and you have like uncertainty in them. So it's a very interesting coupling, and realizing that, like, everything's going to be okay. You're going to have to adjust. You're going to have to pivot, not only in your life, but in the training that you do with people. That's something that took me a couple years to realize. And I feel like I'm starting to get that more and more, where adaptability is just ultimately one of the greatest traits you can have in being a strength coach. You have to be able to adapt. Like, I remember the stories that you told me about how they would almost quiz you guys on, you're in a gym scenario with your team, and then another team comes in and they're using equipment, so you have to use alternate equipment to get the job done. Like, that doesn't just happen at high level athletics. Like, that happens in team spaces with youth sports and with recreational adults. Like, that's going to happen anywhere you go, and being able to calmly figure out what you need to do in that scenario is very, very important.
Yeah, like you were saying, adaptability. I mean, that is probably the number one. I think I said the other thing was the number one thing, so I don't know which one I care more about now.
You can have two. You can have two.
I can have two number ones. All right, I'm gonna have two number ones then. But yeah, adaptability, willing to take those risks too. Both that stuff is huge when it comes becoming a elite coach. For instance, but it's okay if that's not what you want to do. There's plenty of positions like I have now that are more 9 to 5. If you would have asked me 10 years ago that if I would want a management position where I'm working like a 9 to 5, I would have thought you were crazy, right? But things change in life. I think got a lot of my good experience that got me into the position I'm in now because I was taking those risks and because I was pushing myself. In baseball, you're doing the same thing every day or whatever. You're pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone. You're learning things from all of that, and you're just you're learning the ability to change things on the fly as well, which I think helps you out with your career overall. So for me, that got me to where I am now. That eventually, when things kind of started slowing down, and I didn't want to work those coaching hours and travel as much, I had the ability to find a position where I could do that. Right? That's not something I would have wanted to do 10 years ago, but now it's like, I want to spend time with my family, and I don't want to go travel all the time, be gone for a month at a time, be overseas, work until 10 o'clock at night. For me, it makes more sense to have more stability now. So, and if that's something that you want from the beginning, that's totally fine too. You can find that in the commercial settings when it comes to, coaching, and that's totally fine as well. But if you are wanting to get into kind of the elite, like, athlete coaching, especially with teams, like, you're going to have to move places. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to be in uncomfortable situations.
There's certainly perks with every style of gym. I've worked in boutique gyms. I've worked in corporate gyms, more athletics-based gyms. Yeah, I even taught a cycling class at one point. Like, it sounds silly, and there's certainly, like, looking back, like, why did I ever do that? But it gives you areas that you might not otherwise see. Like, a big one for me was when I first started training, outside of an internship that I had. It was being a personal trainer at an Access corporate facility in St. Louis, and it was working at a boutique gym in the Central West End. Um, that required me to wake up around 4 o'clock to get there for a 5 o'clock class, put on a headset with a microphone with a very like Orange Theory style setup, right? First day I show up, nobody gave me keys. Doors are locked. So I'm the only guy there that would have keys. Don't have keys. So we have to wait for 30 minutes for another employee to come who opens it. And I turn on the stereo or like the mic. Everything's out of whack. So I just take that, chuck it to the side, get the timer started, and I'm just screaming at the top of my lungs for this class so everybody can hear me over the really loud music. That was such a thrown into the fire moment looking back, that you have 10 people that are very accustomed to this same style routine, and then I come in and I essentially just screw it all up. Like, it's not a good feeling, but knowing that you can move past that if you continuously just like work at your craft and your technique. And in that case, it was very much like, hey, you're going to be here at this time. You're being like a coordinator of the space and moving people around where they need to go, and they're just working in that arena. So how do you get them to where they need to be and tell them in 3 cues or less what they need to do, because they only have 3 minutes before they have to shift again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think that style of training is scientifically the best or optimal or whatever.
You don't have to be nice here,
but it teaches you how to command your shit and get people to where they need to go and do what they need to do. And that was a big thing that I took from that style of gym.
That's why I said coaching is coaching. Or like at some point, if you're, I had so many people apply to positions that didn't have enough coaching experience, but they had all the certifications. I don't give a shit what your certifications are, as long as you're legal. If you have more coaching experience, I'm probably going to hire you. And I don't care who you're coaching. You could be coaching, like you're saying, cycling. You could be coaching pro athletes. You could be coaching youth sports, whatever. I know pro strength coaches that are shitty, like coaches, or they would be shitty in the training aspect. It depends on the job. Like, I'm not going to hire somebody for an adult class that's worked with pro athletes just because they work with pro athletes. They're probably going to be shitty at that, depending on who they are, right? So, what would you say? Was that your shittiest job then, you think, as far as like coaching?
No, because like you grow to understand how it works.
Yeah.
Like, it became very easy after doing it for a month or so. And then you're ripping out 5 to 7 classes and you're putting hours on top of hours of that. And that also led to a lot of personal training clients that I had for years until I left St. Louis. So when you start to command a room and you're able to show people that are in those classes that you have something to offer and you have value, they might approach you if they're in a financial situation and they're motivated enough to ask for personal training or small group training, which is then something that you can start to build on top of too, because then it goes from being a coordinator of the floor for everybody with loud music going, everybody's pumping on adrenaline, to a very more one-on-one setting that's more geared towards that specific individual. Are they doing it because they want to lose weight? Are they doing it because they just want to have time with a one-on-one and work a little bit more on technique? Like, there's a lot of reasons people choose one-on-one or personal training. And none of them are wrong, right? Like, I think most people that make that jump to one-on-one training are serious in some regard. And that's where you can really start to build up that demographic of people you want to work with as well. Yeah,
that totally makes sense. What would you say your most uncomfortable situation coaching was? Or like, here, while you're thinking, I have an idea. I have a couple thoughts about mine. One, this wasn't really coaching, but way baseball works during batting practice, especially during spring training, you guys are working in and outs. So they're taking ground balls, all that kind of stuff, people that are listening. And as a strength coach, you're not really doing a lot all the time. Once pitches are done, you can maybe run them or take them inside and do some stuff with them. But there's some downtime where you're kind of just out in the outfield, maybe shagging fly balls. I didn't play baseball, and I can't see out of my right eye, so not great at catching things. And I got a coach first spring training ever. They're like, "Hey, Brett, can you take what I forgot what the hell they call it now? Basically, I'm catching at second base for double plays. They're practicing double plays from third base. So I have all these Dominican players who are like 16, 17 that just have cannons for an arm that are going catching fungos at third and then just ripping sidearm to me at second. And I have a bucket that I'm supposed to catch and drop them in there. And I'm just trying not to die. And they could see the fear in my eyes, and they started throwing harder.
Yeah, that tells you a lot about a person, whether they ease up or they bear down on top of
I mean, I might have been in the same situation if I was them because it was funny. But I'm saying that's like a situation where nothing to do with what I should have been doing, like coaching wise. And obviously I was never asked to do it again. Coaches saw that too. But I mean, again, putting yourself in a situation that's shitty, it allowed for me to have some funny stories or connections with some of those Dominican players that didn't speak English. It was hard to connect with all the time anyway. And they, we had to laugh with it, right? And then start working with them in the weight room. So just building those relationships.
Yeah, I would say, I would say mine is definitely centered in athletics. I mean, going into the first spring training, like going through that process and being the new guy on the team we had two other people that were hired at the same time as me that we kind of went through. One guy had tons of experience going into it. He had worked in baseball for years. So he kind of knew how it operated, but being around a team of strength coaches and performance staff that knew what they were doing and had their system very, very built out, and trying to assimilate with that in the midst of over 200 athletes being there that know their schedule and are on a very tight ship. Like that was pretty overwhelming and overstimulating at first. And it was like, how do I fit in? What do I do? It's not that I didn't feel I wasn't good enough to coach. I think there was some imposter syndrome, like, oh shit, like I'm here at a spring training. But yeah, there was some uncomfortable moments in that first spring training because you're trying to meet, number one, all the players, all the staff, everybody's at the facility. They might have worked together for years. So you're just trying to find your pockets to get your name out there and be known so that they know who you are when you're walking through the building. That was one. I would say, when you get out on to the road at your affiliate and you're the only coach there, that's a very real moment as well, because in spring training and extended, you typically have a team with you. It's not just you're the only strength coach. You might have 6 or 7 in your department that are there as well. But when you get to the affiliate, it's you. It's you and your athletic trainer and the on-field coaches, and building out their schedule based on what they might have done with the previous coach before you. How do you handle your time at the field and set it up? Like the reality of that set in pretty quickly, because whatever you set, you have to stick with. And that doesn't mean that you can't change it here and there, but like you want to have your shit tight going into that first game so guys know what to expect. And there was some pressure involved with that. Going down to the Dominican for the first time, just because of the language barrier, like being around baseball, you pick up a lot, especially if you try. And I think that's one of the biggest things is you have to put forth effort if you want to communicate with the Latin players. Because if you don't try, they're not going to try back. Like it's reciprocal in that aspect. But doing that the first time when you are down there and there's not a ton of English speakers gives you a great perspective of when these guys come over to the States for the first time or for their first season, and how roles are kind of reversed. Like you have to find a way to make it work and communicate so that you can get your messaging across effectively, but also just like picking up on everything that goes down in the Dominican and how these athletes start when they're young and how they make the transition to the States and through the affiliates and on. That was a definite change of pace for me as well to see that.
Dude, I like when you're saying, I was thinking about it when you were talking about how you have to try. Like, I feel like it's like that so much with like any athlete too. I mean, obviously there's the language barrier, which it's pretty clear as day if you're trying or not, right? Because you either are getting better at talking or you're not, or you're asking them how to say things or you're not. But I mean, it's probably, you could say it's the same with any athlete really at all, especially like younger athletes that are from a different generation than you. It's like to connect with them, sure, you speak the same language typically, but you might, you have to show them that you're trying to connect with them in some capacity, because you're not just going to connect with them like you did when you were a younger strength coach. Now me and you are old as shit. So it's going to be harder to connect with those 18-year-olds.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's just something I was just thinking about when you're talking there. But for
Yeah,
sure.
and I mean, even thinking to when Mercy first started, I think we had a great introduction with that. Like, to my knowledge, you had not worked with hockey players before that, maybe an offshoot, but neither of us played hockey. And I'm still not convinced you can skate.
I have
But
skates. All right.
you have skates.
And I can skate. Okay.
Okay.
I've been out there. Dave doesn't have skates. He just has shoes. Now, to be fair, I got my skates for $20. I played again sports. And when I took them in to get sharpened at Centene, the guy looked at me and said, "You're going to die."
Yeah. That adds up. That adds up. But back to the point of like, that was not a sport that we had a whole lot of knowledge on other than being viewers.
Yeah.
Like, I watched the Blues, but I didn't ever train hockey players before that.
Why do you think, I'm just getting off topic, not really off topic, but whatever. Why do you think that so many coaches, whether it be strength coaches or actual coaches, think that you have to play the sport to be a good strength coach? Because that's the case with a lot of people will say that we'll say strength coaches that are in one avenue, and we'll say obviously a lot of actual like sport coaches will think that way as well.
I think, from the coach's perspective, it's comfortability. I got back into baseball. I played baseball in college. That's where I wanted to be. It's a comfortability, and you might know some of the nuances that somebody coming in from the outside wouldn't know. You might know the language, the culture, the environment, how things work on the fields or court or ice. In that instance, like, you might just have a deeper understanding of the sport as a whole. I think that validates the coach in the eyes of the athletes and on ice, on field coaches a little bit more. If it's like, oh yeah, this guy played the sport before, he kind of knows what's going on. I think that's probably the overarching theme of why coaches feel they need to play the sport in order to coach it, is the validity of they've been through this. They kind of know what's going on. I mean, it makes sense to me that it's that way. What do you think?
Unpopular opinion. I think that, and obviously this is a very overall arching comment here. Not everybody's going to fall in this, but unpopular opinion would be that a lot of coaches who don't play that sport end up being better strength coaches, because they have to dive in very deep and learn all that kind of stuff that you might not learn. Like, I've never coached. I played football growing up. I never was a strength coach for football, but I was a strength coach for skiing, which, I mean, I've like done recreationally, but never in a competition. In hockey now. And I think for me coming in, I had all this experience as a strength conditioning coach. So I learned this background on how the body moves, right? And then I go in and I have this team I have to work with, and I have to learn how that sport works. So I have to almost peel back the onion, and I have no preconceived notions of how this should be done. So I'm strictly taking how this should be done from a training standpoint, and not necessarily like how it was done for me standpoint. And I think that, is a positive, honestly, because it allows you to see the sport in potentially a different manner than you would if you were a coach or an athlete that played it growing up.
Yeah, you don't have the rose-colored glasses. It certainly leads to more introspection and research on the sport and what it requires. I would 100% agree with you there. I mean, if you give a shit, like, and you want to help, and it's a sport that you're not accustomed with, you have to learn about it. You have to learn what the physiological demands of that sport are. And at a very base level, all athletes need GPP, and they need to be able to be prepared for their sport. But the further up that hierarchy of needs you go, it does get more specific. And I'm not talking about like main lifts or anything like that, but the specificity of training athletes does shift from time to time. You take a sport like track and field or skiing or snowboarding where they're working on annual calendars a little bit more than maybe a multi-sport athlete in high school. You have to kind of know the difference of how their calendars and schedules line up with the different phases of their year or their month, as you're going through like their planning and programming.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but I think as far as like actually like programming the work itself, if you're looking how the body moves, you're looking at how they need to produce specific types of power, what their recovery needs to be as far as a conditioning standpoint, and common injuries and how you can, whether they be like overuse injuries or acute injuries, and how you can try to help, as we talked, prevent those in air quotes. I think that overall, no matter what sport you're looking at, is going to be the same. And I think a really cool way to, I guess bring this up or loop this in at the end is I've been working with a Paralympic rugby athlete, so wheelchair rugby, and she had reached out to me, and she was even like, "Hey, I was looking for a strength coach that has worked with people in wheelchairs before, and I have not." And she was not able to find anybody that had significant experience. If they had, it was not to her level. It was people that were trying to help people just like, get back to regular life. She's like, "I'm an elite athlete. Like I need to be pushed." Right. So her coach suggested find somebody that has experience working with elite athletes. They're going to know how the body moves, right? They'll figure it out. And that's really what I've had to do, which has been really fun. Honestly, I've kind of felt like a young strength coach again, going in and like, first off, learning her sport. Also learning like what she has to deal with because she has her own issues as far as her disease, and how all that blends together. And a lot of that sometimes is from conversations with her on like, "Hey, how does this feel? Does this feel like it does in your sport? You feel like this is helping?" Those conversations. But she trusts me because of my background, just working with elite sports and just taking her sport and breaking down, the program that way. And that's kind of been, I don't know. It's something I've always, I guess, thought about, but to actually like verbalize it now a little bit more.
Yeah, and for most athletes, especially at an Olympic level or a professional level, like training is a part of what they do. It is not what they do. They are paid to, for instance, throw a baseball. They are not paid to bench press. And that's where conversations with the athlete, like what does your sport demand? What do they think about their training? Like those things come into play. And that's going to happen differently at all different levels and with different styles of athletes. So, I think looking at a whole, there are way more similarities between athletes training across the spectrum of sports than there are differences.
Yeah.
But no, what you said about, being a coach in a sport you've never played gives you inside information into the education that goes towards learning the sport, and what they need is ultimately going to make you a better coach.
Yeah, I think you got to spend more time actually diving into some of that stuff, which is cool. And I think that kind of like honestly wraps up our entire conversation here, as far as like we were talking about from the very beginning, getting yourself into uncomfortable situations as a coach. Don't pigeonhole yourself into training one type of athlete, one type of person, one type of sport, whatever. Don't be like, "Hey, I want to get into strength conditioning and work with football." That might be your end goal, and that's great. But go out and work with 15 other sports, and they're all going to help you get better at training football players at the end of the day, right? So I think that's kind of a cool message that we definitely didn't plan, but worked out, where it's like, dude, work with everybody and use your knowledge and go out and, study the person, the sport, the movement, the injury, whatever, and take what to try to develop the best program you can for that individual and what they have going on or what that team has going on, versus like, "Hey, I need to do this specifically because it's a hockey style workout."
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised you remembered where we started and where we ended, and you kind of bookended that, but
well, I mean, I'm out of beer, so that's the end. But cool. Well, we'll wrap it up, and thanks for joining, everybody. If you enjoyed it, like and share. See you next time.